There you go.
Okay.
Sarita, I'm having a hard time hearing you, so if you could get closer to the microphone, that'd be helpful.
Jim, you may start the meeting now.
Okay, but I think your voice is only coming out of this robot thing in front of me. Is that right?
Yes,
Can you hear that at all?
I can, but it's a challenge.
for the
Okay.
most part, Liz is gonna be helping run the meeting today. Sarita's in the background to help with minutes.
Great.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna call the meeting to order of the Access Advisory Committee, and we'll have a roll call now.
Turn on your mic. Your mic's not.
Mine's not on?
There you go.
Am I on now? Okay.
Yes.
Call the meeting to order and let's have a roll call.
Okay. Chair James Marston,
I'm here.
Vice Chair Robert Burnham,
Present.
Committee Member Skylar Kovic,
Present.
Committee Member Nick Coons,
Present.
Committee Member Karen Luckett, Committee Member Michael Rassler, Committee Member Susan Tejada. Here.
Thank you. Now we have a place where you can have committee members give any reports or staff announcements. So I'll start with you, Ashley. Do you have any staff announcements?
Good morning, Chair Marston. One announcement this morning, we do have a hard stop at 12 o'clock noon today. So we'll keep the agenda moving along.
Okay. Any member reports or interesting comments?
Not sure if this is the appropriate time to discuss or not, but I did want to follow up on a comment that was made in February by a former employee of the city who felt that some of our frustrations might have been inappropriately directed at staff, and that it should be directed at council. And I just wanted to clarify, I understand that this committee is advisory to staff, but is it, am I safe to assume that staff reports our frustration up to the city administrator, and that the city administrator reports that frustration up to council? I can't believe that the council's not aware of our ongoing frustration after 2 years, and that I should be expected to go make another presentation to council to be heard. Ms. Shu, can you speak to that?
Yes, Mr. Coons.
I'm not hearing you on the microphone either.
How about now? Is that better? Okay. Yes, staff certainly elevates the concerns of the committee to senior management and up to the city administrator's office.
Okay.
And you'll hear later on the agenda an update on progress that we've made
Good.
over the last couple of months on the ADA enforcement on the State Street Promenade.
But are you saying it doesn't go directly to council, right? It just goes to city administrator and senior staff?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
If there's a problem with resources, funding, it's administrator's job to seek that resolution from council, correct?
That would be correct. It would
Yeah.
be through the budget
Okay,
process.
so if there's a breakdown in this process, is that the city administrator? I'm sorry, I shouldn't put you in that position. Thank you.
All right.
Chair Marston, this is a quick question, point of housekeeping. See, it seems like this item, committee member reports under number 3, isn't that covered under number 8?
That's the ad hoc reports, right?
The committee reports,
So if a committee member has experienced something that they want to share that wasn't part of an ad hoc discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
You might have gone to a different meeting or just heard something on the street or read a newspaper article, whatever. Does that make sense?
I see. I'm sorry, not number 8, number 12.
Right.
the
That's the ad hoc and subcommittee reports.
Okay, this is something different.
Yes.
Bob, if you've been to another committee, downtown parking or something, and want to share what you've learned there, or if you've had experienced a problem in the public right away or something like that, you as a committee member, this is your public comment time, I think.
I got you. Sorry to take up time. That's one clarification.
Yeah, I guess I do have a related, question, but I think someone else wanted to go first. Maybe Suzanne?
Oh, yes, I can make a comment under this item. I just wanted to give you guys a brief update of the State Street Advisory Committee that I'm on, and we are taking a break over the summer and reconvening in August. But currently, the city is reviewing the applicants who submitted applications for the RFP. And then they're gonna go through an interview process to select a consultant for that, the master planning of State Street. And then the interviews are gonna take place in June. And hopefully by July, August, they'll select somebody to, as a consultant to work with the subcommittee and city staff to develop a master plan.
Is there any time frame on what that
How
consultant?
long that would take?
Yeah,
I know that the applicants submitted a schedule in their proposals. I haven't reviewed that. But I think it will definitely be through 2023, 2024.
just, okay, to get the plans.
Just to get the
Okay.
master plan.
All right, thank you. Any other reports from the committee members?
I guess not a
Oh, yeah,
report.
sorry.
That's good. Not a report, but
Turn your mic.
trying to, there we go. Yeah, so I had verbally offered to be on either the website committee or the sidewalks committee. But I don't seem to be on there yet. And now I remember that maybe it did have to be passed officially to make that change happen if the board wanted to put me on one of those committees.
Okay, I had that on for at the ad hoc place, but yes, I think Sarita has told me that it just needs to be spoken of. So
Okay.
you, Sarita, he wants to join the website committee,
That's
right?
right.
And
Chair Marston, if I could just add, I believe committee member Kovich had to leave early.
Right.
The last meeting, and so we didn't want to add him without his concurrence. So
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
We'll make a note that you're added to the website.
Okay,
Thank you.
So you're-
And I think that committee member Kovich is a far better representative for that ad hoc committee than I am. I don't experience accessibility via the web quite the same way that our vision impaired members do. So I would gladly resign my seat for him.
Thank you, Mr. Coons.
Jim, can I ask you, to bring the microphone, because I'm not hearing you real well with your mic. Bring it a little closer to your,
Mine?
yeah, I'm not hearing you.
Okay. can you
That's
hear me
better.
now?
Can you, yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got the speaker right in front of me, so it sounds loud to me, but okay. All right. Item number 4, do we have any public comments for the Access Advisory Committee? No. All right. No public comments.
There's no public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. The next item is approval of the minutes. Have we all read the minutes? And does anyone have any changes or suggestions on the minutes? Well, it sounds like you're in favor of this, so let's have a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
And a
So moved.
second? Can I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, so roll call vote on approving of the minutes of February.
Chair James Marston,
Here, approve.
Vice Chair Robert Burnham,
Aye.
Committee Member Skylar Kovic,
Aye.
Committee Member Nick Koontz,
I
Committee Member Karen Luckett,
I,
and Committee Member Suzanne Tejeda.
Aye.
All right, thank you. The next is going to be a report from Ms. Ashley Shu, the ADA coordinator, on updates?
Chair Marston, excuse me, just a minute. I just wanted to say hi to Karen. We met in person for the first time. She's sitting next to Skylar, so I wasn't sure. if you were
Okay.
aware.
Hi, how are you?
Karen.
Nice to meet you.
You met everybody now, right? Karen next door to you and.
Tell me your name.
Suzanne.
Suzanne.
This is
Okay,
Skylar.
Skylar, I know.
Okay.
Nick.
I'm getting my hearing aids next week, so.
Good.
Okay. All right, Ms. Shu,
All right, good morning, Chair Marston. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, I have a number of updates. I have wanted to run through some items, follow up from the last meeting, and then talk about a couple of new updates as well. So as you've noticed, and as you all know, we're back to in-person meetings citywide. That is a state Brown Act requirement that committee members participate in person. We do have the option, if a committee member needs to or would like to participate remotely. I would need about 2 weeks advance notice prior to the meeting so that we can ensure that your location is fully accessible to the public. This is a state law requirement, that your location is accessible to the public and that we also have to publish your location on the agenda. So I need some advance notice to make sure that we can get those items sorted out and published on the agenda before we publish a week before the meeting. And then you do see we have been able to, took a big team to figure it out as we're all adjusting quickly to the changing conditions, but we've been able to provide remote public access for these meetings. So the public can view the meeting through Zoom and participate in public comment through Zoom or of course in person. Chair Marston was explaining this device we have on the table. It's called a Meeting Owl, and the camera can follow around the room. It also has a microphone that's picking up the voices, and that is what people participating through Zoom are seeing. For future meetings, starting next meeting, we will have our city TV or our internal city staff recording the video for us, and that means that it will be live streamed on our city website. This meeting the recording will be posted after the fact because we can't live stream. The Zoom platform is a live stream for this meeting. So I wanted to give those updates in terms of how the meetings are for today and moving forward. Committee Member Kuntz?
I have a quick question about the remote or hybrid meeting. As it stands today, under Brown Act law, theoretically, I could attend a city council meeting in the home of a city council member.
That's correct.
Very interesting. Thank you.
no, wait a minute.
Were there any other questions on that before I move on to my next update?
Is that camera up there not working? That right now, the only camera is this one
That's
that
correct.
goes to each voice.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, a few other follow-up items from the last meeting. There was a discussion about the railroad depot lot and the accessibility requirements that came through from a report from the DOJ. And that report was sent out to the committee members in March. So I wanted to follow up and make sure everyone received that. There was also a discussion about valet issues, and our city attorney, Dan Henschke, was following up on some of those items and spoke with committee member Luckett, as well as Mr. Railing from Accessible Santa Barbara. And the update I received from him is that he was waiting on a bit more information, some details so that he could look further into the valet issues on Cabrillo Boulevard in front of Flor de Mais. So that is still an ongoing pending item.
Do we know what those details he's looking for are?
I believe he spoke with Ms. Luckett.
Okay,
I don't know.
And
Ms.
I,
Luckett, if
and
you're
I
able to-
emailed him a description that he wanted regarding the complaint. So
Okay.
I am waiting for him to respond. One of the parties that had said they were going to be working on it, the Montesino Coast Village, road private lot needs to designate another handicap spot because a parklet is taking over one spot. And the other issue is, the private lot behind Flor de Mas. And, that's a big issue because, when we spoke to them, they said that they can do anything they want with that handicap spot. And a handicapped person is not allowed to park their own car there. Even if there's modifications in the vehicle, they said their valets know how to work with all the handicap modifications, which is
Okay,
unacceptably false.
may I suggest those details need to go to Dan Henschke? If you haven't.
Right, I
Yeah.
did. So those are still ongoing issues.
Okay,
Committee member Luckett, I want to thank you for taking up this mantle and this effort. I have tried in vain for multiple years to gain traction on the same issue. And I can provide you with a list of at least a half a dozen other locations in the city of Santa Barbara where these valet operators operate in impunity with in utter disregard to the civil rights of this community's disabled members.
So would that be an issue that Dan would be addressing then formally?
well, he should, I would
Good
think.
luck.
Yeah,
Yes.
we haven't gotten any movement on this for quite a while. It's something that we need to do, and I suggest that you two work together on this, and maybe Suzanne, would you be interested? Do you have problems?
I am on, well, this is a separate committee about it.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a valet parking problem commission, ad hoc,
Mhm,
or we just do it informally,
mhm.
but I hope that Nick at least, Nick
Or
and
just
Karen.
a valet ad hoc? I mean, not a
Yeah.
valet, a parking ad hoc.
Well, we already have some blue parking, so I think we have to work on just the valet problems.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say that. You're right.
Okay.
It's a hybrid, like the one in Coast Village Road is not valet. It's
No.
just,
That's a-
right.
That's a blue curve.
right.
Now, there's another issue that was brought up to me this week regarding parking and giving out parking tickets, I think was an issue. And the park ranger at Shoreline told me that they're not allowed to give out tickets because the sign is not in compliance. The sign is like 8 feet high and it has to be per California Vehicle Code
Right.
6 feet high. So they would illegally be giving a ticket to someone who's illegally parked because the sign isn't correct.
And that employee, that parks employee doesn't have the ability or direction to report to Parks Department leadership that this is a maintenance issue that needs to be corrected. I will also, that's a rhetorical question, Miss Committee Member Luckett. I'm a little bit frustrated because I think that's something that staff should internally take the initiative to correct rather than just ignore the problem and make excuses. But I anecdotally will share that I have known city park staff to park their maintenance vehicles in ADA parking spaces while they go about their maintenance duties.
Yes. Well, I think someone should write to Jill Zachary, who's head of parks, and just say you haven't followed the code. The code says how high it should be, and if they're not doing it, they should fix it immediately.
Right, I can write
Follow up
her.
on that?
Pardon?
Yes, I will follow up on that item with the Parks Department.
Okay,
Thank you.
let's get back to Ashley's report. Yes.
Thank you. Let's see, next item is a follow-up related to our downtown parking lots. And there were issues raised regarding with the shift to the license plate recognition that during the times when the kiosks are not manned, that there was not a way for the handicap placard and the additional time to be validated when there isn't a person manning the kiosk. So I did follow up with staff, and On the exit column, there's a call button that can be pressed if there's any issues with exiting the lot. There's also a phone number that you can either call or text from your cell phone to connect you with staff, and they can remotely see the vehicle through a camera and can validate the handicap placard in that way to allow for the additional time without a charge and to open the gate. So I wanted to follow up with that update, and that's how that's being accommodated.
Ms. Shu, I have a question about that. A text message or a phone call sounds fine, but what if is there a certainty or somewhat of a guarantee that, say, if I call, that I will not get a voicemail, I will get a live person, or if I text my concern, that I'll get an immediate response?
Committee member Burnham, that's my understanding, is that number is there's a staff person taking those calls in real time.
24/7?
Thank you.
Well, not during the times when the gates are up, when
Okay.
there's no parking.
I didn't realize that was the case. I've been avoiding those parking lots for so many years. I'm not familiar.
I believe most lots after 11 PM, the gates are up.
Okay, and then upon entry, is there still a ticketing system or is it just open to enter?
I believe there's still a ticketing system. They're running a dual system right now with the license plate recognition cameras and taking a ticket.
You know, I'm very hopeful that we could make this automation accessible. I wanted to engage downtown parking in that discussion when it first came up, but Mr. Dayton was completely resistant to it. He said, oh, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. Anyway, here we are.
So, just to clarify, you think in the future, they're just gonna have just a license plate reader to come into the garage? No ticket, no push button, just come in and then pay on the way out?
Chair Marston, I'll have to confirm that, but I believe so.
Okay, because some people have a problem reaching over to the button in the first place, so it'd be great if it's automatically in.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for checking on
Is
that.
there such a thing as these parking meters that you can hold a little card at your window and they read it like like the hotel entry cards? So you don't have to actually do that reach or open the door or, is there such a thing do you know of that, Ashley?
Committee member Luckett, that I'm not entirely sure of. I know that the city is just now rolling out the ability to pay in that way from your cell phone, you can scan a QR code and be able to exit in that way, but I'm not sure about the entry.
Entry exit type thing with, a little scan would be really nice for people.
I believe in February, I asked staff to look into whether or not I was correct in believing that there was an RFID reader on these point of sale terminals. Were you able to get clarification on that?
Member Knuds, that I did not get clarification on.
Okay.
I did not ask that question specifically.
Okay, I did ask staff, did I not? Do you remember that or am I imagining it?
I'm not remembering.
Okay,
Committee member Knuds.
I understand. I could be wrong. Can you please, I believe I recognize an RFID reader on there and more pointedly, I'd like to know from downtown parking if there's an opportunity to use that RFID reader in this process somehow. It looks to me like it's probably there for staff and like an employee pass, but and I recognize that that's not a really clean solution for accessibility, because if you're not aware and go through the process to get an RFID tag, it's of no use to you. I prefer this license plate reader could recognize the handicap parking or handicap license plate. But again, that doesn't solve for a window hanger. Perhaps there's I recognize that there's a problem with focusing the camera on the driver for security, privacy concerns. Perhaps there's a way that the window hanging placard could be scanned by the point of sale system. Is that something that you can look into?
Yes, Committee Member Coons, I can follow up on that as well as get clarification on the RFID readers.
Great. I would, I think that it probably would be more constructive if an ad hoc committee were to help downtown parking on this, outside of AAC, but would you check and see if they would be receptive to an ad hoc or working group?
Yes, Committee Member Coons, I'll ask.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. A couple more items. Updates on blue curve changes since our last AAC meeting. There were 3 blue zone removals, 2 on Santa Ynez Court and 1 at 637 West Ortega. 2 of those, all 3 were related to the handicap blue zones no longer being needed because the residents are no longer living at those addresses. And we had 2 blue zone additions, 1 on Santa Ynez Street and 1 on West Padre Street. And I can provide those exact addresses if you are interested.
And those are just all residential places, right,
That's correct.
for individuals, okay.
Correct.
I appreciate that report. And from my perspective, I'm happy to see that this inventory is getting turned over. I don't feel if it's in a residential area and it's being requested by a resident, I don't feel like this committee needs to hear details of that, but thank you. Others may feel differently. I'd like to see if there's consensus. I don't want to give staff direction that others don't agree with.
I support your view on that as well.
Yeah,
Residential blue curves would be out of our concern.
Yeah,
it might be nice just to hear the total numbers, but not the address or anything.
okay, but thank you.
Because we were always worried before because there didn't seem to be any way to go through the list and say who's dead, who's moved. So it sounds like somebody now is looking at this, and that's all that really matters. When you need one, you get one. When you don't need it, it's taken away.
Correct.
Thank you.
I will make a note and I will not report in the future.
I just didn't want you to feel pressure to. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask a follow-up question on that? Regarding violators who do park in the zones, is there a way to access how many tickets have been written for such a thing?
Committee Member Luckett, I would have to follow up with the PD on that question. I don't know the answer to that.
No, because I think that's a committee concern that that violators aren't ticketed as they should be.
Committee Member Luckett, I'd like to share my history and insight into this. For several years, we've been asking for SBPD to come and report on that. We occasionally get someone to send us some numbers. I've never been terribly impressed by the numbers, but SBPD seems resistant. We did get 1 or 2 members of the SBPD to come in and talk to us and hear our concerns, but in terms of long-term ongoing follow-up, we've not seen it. When I first joined this committee, before I joined, I presented a proposal that the city adopt a citizen enforcement program that was application-based, and that was rejected by SBPD. I've since heard from Mr. Demore that maybe that is not so unpalatable today, and he was going to follow up with SBPD on that, but as we know, he's moved on. So at this time, I'd like to ask Ms. Shu to pick up that project and see if we can get any traction there again.
Yes, I will do my best to see where things were at with that item and follow up with the PD.
Thank you. I see you've been very diligent about these things and I appreciate it. I want to recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just taking a couple of notes.
I think a year or so ago, we did get one document that showed how many tickets were done in the last year. And I would like to get that on a regular basis. That's part of my proposal for the agendas at the end, but we probably won't get there. But we need to have at least once a year report from the PD about enforcement, how many people are out there looking. Are they gonna go into private lots? Will they ever go to a private lot or not? And how much they're collecting and how many for the year. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Just a couple more quick updates related to blue curbs into the commercial areas on the 0 blocks of State Street. We do have 6 new locations. We have work orders that are entered and they should be completed in the next month. So we have one at Coda at the southwest corner, Ortega at the southwest corner, Cannon Perdido at the northeast corner, Figueroa at the northeast corner, Anapamu at the northeast corner, and Victoria at the southeast corner. And committee member Kuntz, I had sent you that list a few weeks ago, and we did have one change. We were able to change the corner at Victoria to the southeast corner, which does provide for the ramp at the rear of the vehicle.
Wonderful. Thank you very
So
much.
those should be implemented within the next month, unless there are any utility type conflicts if poles need to be installed.
And these
Yes,
are all,
you mentioned- oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
You
Bob.
mentioned the corner, what is the cross street that these are referring to?
So these are all at State Street.
State Street, thank you.
Are those all red curbs currently?
Chair Marston, I believe so.
Okay,
but,
it's not that
uh,
important. I just was curious. Okay.
Yeah, I don't recall off the top of my head without looking at my larger list.
Wow. So 6 new ones, that's great.
Yeah, that is.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes.
And a quick update on our website replacement project. That is a huge undertaking by the whole city, and we're about a month away from the rollout of our new website. And we can discuss more under subcommittee reports, but wanted to let the committee know that that project is going full steam ahead. We're working hard to transition all of our pages over, and I would like to recommend at our next meeting that we provide an update and show you some of the new tools on the new website, including how to report accessibility concerns, etc.
Sounds good.
And finally, I know this is taking a bit longer, but we've had a lot of activity over the last couple of months. We are working on a new member orientation document. Sarita and I are pulling together a variety of documents that could be helpful for new members that are joining the committee, or even for members who have been on the committee for a while. And we're planning to make that document digitally available to the committee members. So we are working on that and hope to have that out within the next several weeks.
Thank you. I know Ms. Luckett was asking about that.
Yeah, and I would also like to, besides having it as a manual, I would like to do a sit down in person so we could ask follow-up questions. Some of the things about line of communication and a little bit about history and such, just like we're hired as a staff member, we have to be oriented to where the bathroom is and who's the boss and such. So, so if I could request that once that's finished, that we, that the committee members review it and then we have a sort of in person to see if we have questions or want something added or maybe needs to be revised at some point down the line.
Committee member Luckett, we can certainly talk about that and see what we can do to accommodate. You know, I would suggest that the committee members review the document, and then if you have an individual request for a follow-up meeting, we could meet on an individual basis that way.
Thank you, committee.
Ms. Shu, I wanted to share an opinion that this orientation packet we should give some consideration to how we can convey institutional knowledge. There's good continuity and projects don't get lost in turnover of staff and.
Thank you, Committee Member Knuts. I made a note of that.
Thank you.
And that concludes my coordinator's report for today.
Thank you for all of that.
Yes.
The next one is item number 7, and that's housing element of the city's general plan. We have planner and Dan Gillette. Is that Glade? Or Gillette, okay, I got it right the first time. He's the principal partner with the Community Development Department. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you said, my name is Jessica Metzger and I work in the planning department just upstairs. And Dan and I are here today to give you an update on one of our new projects that we're working on in long-range planning, which is the housing element. And so housing element is a document that is updated every 8 years that includes policies and programs to further us as a city in meeting the housing needs of our community. All jurisdictions across California, both cities and counties, are required to do a housing element every 8 years. And our last housing element focused on really creating incentive programs to get developers to build more housing in our community, specifically multi-unit housing or multifamily. And these incentives included increasing the density, specifically in the downtown area and around major transit corridors to allow for more units in those areas, and also to decrease parking requirements. And the rationale behind that is to take that space that would be used for parking and instead build housing with that space. Having already gone through the exercise of creating more housing through these incentives with the private development community, this next housing element is really focusing on funding sources for new programs. And so we're here before you today to really ask you as a committee and members to engage in our housing element process. So I've been going to each of the boards of commissions in the city, asking to sign up for our interested parties list, which will send you an email of all of the upcoming kind of touch points in the process. So we're going to have a public in-person meeting on the program on June 22nd at the Faulkner Gallery. And then the draft will be released for a month time review in July of this year. So I'd also like to ask you as a committee, if you would help me and recommend accommodations for the community that you serve to further engage, and also how best to have this document reviewed by all. And so that's my part of the presentation. I'm not sure if Dan has anything to add. And we're available for questions, of course.
Ms. Metzger, this is Bob Burnham. First, I've seen a lot of things on the news about this effort toward building what they call tiny houses, small units, especially geared toward possibly those who are unhoused and people with low income. And what I'm wondering is if this is included in your element, and if there is any element of full consideration to accessibility. I know these are tiny spaces, not only for overall space accommodation, but given adequate space within the unit itself. Is there a full consideration given to accessibility and creating these tiny houses? That was the first question that came to mind.
Yes, thank you for that question. So at this point in time, we're not looking to include any programs for tiny homes. We do have incentives already built into our existing code based on state law for accessory dwelling units, which are granny flats, but those have to be built to building code. There's other issues with tiny homes as well, is that they're not often tied into city systems, so we haven't as a community really looked at them as any long-term solution to anything.
Thank you.
May I suggest you contact the Independent Living Resource Center? They do a lot of work with disabled housing, and I think they might have some good input for you.
Yeah.
They have a big network of people if you're looking for input, but they work especially with disabled housing. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually just talked to Talia, I think yesterday, and we're going to give a presentation to them in a couple weeks on this too.
okay. Is that at the Santa Barbara office or?
I believe so. Erica or Erin and Talia were the two. that-
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then I also got, just from some previous comment, Accessible Santa Barbara. So I might be asking for an email contact for them to make sure they know about this process.
Okay.
Can I ask a couple follow-up questions? So is this gonna be like an apartment style, separate unit for the handicap? Is that what we're talking about?
What this housing element is it sets programs and policies in place for all housing types for a community for the next 8 years. So what we're looking for from each of the different communities that we're talked to in regards to this is things that you think are missing currently. So if that's something that you think should be built into code that isn't currently existing in ADA, then that's the kind of feedback we'll be looking for in July when the draft comes out, or at that public meeting on June 22nd.
Ms. Metzger, just one more question. Years ago, I served a brief time on the Citizens Housing Task Force, I think it was called. And one of their big pushes they were advocating for was the preservation and possibly retrofitting of existing housing. Is this a part of the new element that's being drafted?
Yes, committee members. So that is something that also we have been talking about. We put a lot of effort into creating new housing, but we do have a housing stock that is aging. And so we will be looking for the possibility of city council looking at funding sources for rehabilitation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also wanted to ask, this is an issue that doesn't often come up as a public dwelling site, but a type of building with sort of a community kitchen, maybe a community front room, something like an assisted living that students would like, and that maybe handicapped people who can't cook their own meals would like. So to centralize living quarters, but separate bedrooms off of the main, central living or shared community space. Is that something that is in the domain of this committee, Sharon?
I'm not sure if that would be or not. It's allowed by code to create those types of developments, but we are not the ones that actually build the housing. And so that's kind of market driven.
But you don't know if the rules for permitting such a building, either retrofitting or building new, exists right now? And is that something that maybe could be put on the, permitting process? Because I know, for instance, a lot of people who can't cook for themselves, a lot of elderly who want company, a lot of students who are never home. They just need a place to sleep and maybe a fridge, maybe a microwave. So this could maybe solve a lot of the single family housing issues that A, are pricing a lot of people out of the market, and B, take up a lot of space and not really needed.
Okay, yeah, I'll look into that further and see if there's any thing that keeps that from happening in our current code.
Will we be all on the mailing list to know the next meeting?
Yeah, so if you'd like, I can just add your email lists or your emails to the list. Is it city emails or do you have private emails? Or I'll just get it from Ashley or Sarita. Yeah,
Thank
so
you
you'll
so
get
much.
an email that says you were added to the list. That's not spam, that was me.
Thank you.
And Ashley, can you also get him the accessible Santa Barbara email that I know you have? Okay.
Can I suggest that perhaps Ms. Metzger forward the sign up information to Ms. Shu, and Ms. Shu or Ms. King could distribute that to the board members who can then sign up if they like. I'd like to second the suggestion, the recommendation that you get in contact with Accessible Santa Barbara. I think he'll be an invaluable resource to you. And that's accessiblesb@gmail.com. And then I wanted to give a little bit of feedback here today, just briefly, and maybe see if there's unanimous support for this position statement from the AAC. I personally would not be in favor of any policy decision that eliminates all parking requirements. If you remove all parking requirements, you remove all ADA parking requirements. If you have one parking space, it has to be ADA accessible. So I would not support a minimum lower than one. Does the rest of the committee agree with that?
Yes.
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 Okay, so that's unanimous feedback. If and when, or likely when, you have to remove all parking requirements, the city should require the developer to shoulder the burden of providing on-street ADA parking that is completely accessible. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Great,
Thank
thank
you.
you very
Yeah,
much. Have a good day.
All right.
Thank you, Dan.
We do have one public comment.
Okay.
This is a call-in user. I'm going to allow you to talk. Please identify your name.
Hi,
ahead.
this is Will Railing, Accessible Santa Barbara. How are you this morning? I was happy to just lurk in the background in the hopes that this meeting would get through all the agenda items before the time cutoff. However, my ears just started to burn a couple of minutes ago for some reason. I'm not sure why. So I thank you, Ms. Metzger and Mr. Gullett, for the presentation. We have a new email. I can be reached at will@accessiblesb.org. Although the email that Mr. Board Member Kuntz just mentioned is also still good. So just two quick comments on this issue. Both things that you probably have both heard before, okay? And first is that as bad as the crisis and shortage is in affordable housing, the crisis and shortage in accessible affordable housing is even worse. And city staff's aware of that. The Housing Authority is aware of that, and they work hard on this issue. Jacob Lexner Buxton at the ILRC has done a lot of great work on this issue as well. So I think the awareness is there, and I know it's something you'll keep in mind in this process. Second, I'll just sort of support what Board Member Kuntz already said, that for many people with disabilities looking for housing, they may not use a car, they may not need a car, but there's a component, an undeniable component of people with disabilities that are dependent on their personal vehicle for transportation. Often it's a van with a ramp, for example. And the problem and if you're still on the line, maybe you could respond if you have time. My understanding is that the parking requirements have already been completely removed for new projects downtown. We've seen a couple of projects proposed, including, recently one on Garden Street that will have 0 parking. So I believe that that's true already, not something that's coming. So maybe you can clarify that. And so for that component of people that are dependent on their personal vehicle, these buildings are just buildings that they won't be able to consider as housing. So I just hope there's an awareness of that. And, if you're looking for support from the disability community for creation of new funding sources, I hope that you will all keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah,
Do you have a comment on his question?
yeah, yeah, very quick comment, just to back that up, that there are also many of us disabled people who have family members who have cars that we need to live with, and so yeah, that's another reason for availability of accessible parking at these kinds of locations.
Yes, thank you, committee members. So in 2020, City Council did pass an ordinance that restricted or removed the restriction of having parking per units in the downtown area, the central business district. So a developer does not have to put any parking in, you are correct. And can only put up to 1 space per unit if they do decide to do parking. So that is something that has already been approved in 2020 and has been in effect since then.
Just a quick question on that. Does the city really think that people who have cars won't even move to those places, or they're just gonna be parking on the streets and in people's driveways and stuff? Or do they really think that you're gonna get a bunch of non-drivers in the downtown apartments?
So the rationale for removing the parking in the downtown area was that this is an area that has an active transportation network. It has bicycle lanes as well as pedestrian boulevards that are larger than regular sidewalks. And it's close to employment centers and commercial centers. And so walking would be something that people that chose to live in the downtown or bicycling would be preferred to them. There's still plenty of other areas in the city that multifamily is also being built in that doesn't have this parking change. And so they're still required to have parking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you both for coming. The next person we have is City Attorney John Doimus to talk about the Brown Act. John, take it away.
I've been asked to move closer to you for the camera, so
Okay.
I'm moving around.
Afternoon, board. As Chair Marson said, my name is Assistant City Attorney John Doimus. I'm honored to be here to present a presentation on the Ralph Brown Act. It's interesting, the Ralph Brown Act is named after former State Assemblyman Ralph M. Brown. So I guess when you write the act, you get to name it after yourself. Always confusing for me sometimes because there's also an act called the Myers-Millis-Brown Act that deals with labor relations. So sometimes I ask staff, wait, which Brown Act are we talking about? Are we talking about Ralph or Myers? Next slide, please. So I want to give a quick overview of what my presentation will cover. We'll go over what constitutes a meeting. We'll discuss illegal meetings, notices and agendas, public participation rights, closed sessions, which I'll briefly go over here. I think it's just good for edification purposes. This board doesn't really have to worry about closed sessions. I'll explain the very few examples where a board, a committee, or council can go into it. And really briefly, a history, or maybe non-existent history of what criminal penalties and civil remedies there are for Brown Act violations. Next slide, please. So during this presentation, I will, usually I like elaborating on what's, not reading off the slide, but elaborating on it. But this one, I think some of the things I do kind of want to read off and expound upon. So I think this is a very important quote. in the government code. And this is the section that starts off the Brown Act. And it says, the people of the state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created. Why did I want to read that important section out? I think sometimes in general, and being an assistant city attorney for 11 years and advising on boards and commissions and working with staff and board members, there's a lot of rules and regulations we go for the Brown Act. And many times, to be frank, sometimes it can be very inconvenient. But we have to recognize, and what this quote stands for, is the purpose of the Brown Act is not for city staff, it's not for members of the board, it's for the benefit of the public. So those inconveniences are there as controls for transparency. So that is why we have this act it's created for, because it is for ultimately good of the public. Next slide, please. So what's covered here? Obviously, a commission, a committee, a board that has temporary or permanent, we'll go into that. We'll go into also standing committees. Obviously, this board right here is a Brown Act board, so we must follow the rules of the Brown Act. Next slide, please. Again, here's a more specific group in terms of where it usually applies: city councils, boards, and groups created by city councils and boards, whether it be a standing committee or ad hoc. Next slide. What's a standing committee? Well, standing committee is less than a quorum of members. So from a board, so if city council wants to create one, you would have maybe 2 council members out of the 7, or in this case, we have, is it 6 or 7 board members? We have 7.
We have 7 here.
Yeah, so it'd be at least 3. It also would include other members. So one example is the State Street Advisory Committee. You have several groups of members of city council, planning commission, etc. It can be advisory or decision-making. This board, which I'll get it to in the end, going over the 2021 resolution, is an advisory role. There's some boards that have both, and some just, so this one's advisory, but it could be either. And it has continuing jurisdiction over that subject matter. So another example is State Street in terms of that, or different committees that have long-running jurisdiction on a particular issue. And has, most importantly, a fixed schedule meeting, so the public knows when the meetings occur. In these circumstances, when you have one, the Brown Act applies. Now, for ad hoc, it doesn't apply. And ad hoc is, again, less than a quorum of the members of the committee or board. It's advisory only, so it has no decision-making powers. It's short-term, and there's no fixed scheduled meeting. Next slide, please. Also, just for curiosity's sake, private corporations, LLCs, designated by the city, can be a Brown Act committee or board. And so that's one thing to be aware of, as well as council members elect. So this specifically applies just to council members, not commissioners or board members. After the November election, anything from that point until they're sworn in January, they must follow the requirements of the Brown Act. Next slide, please. We already kind of went over ad hoc. Next slide, please. So what are meetings defined, right? We're taking some type of action, and that's what we're doing here today. Before I was listening to the item before on the housing element, right? We're here to discuss, deliberate, and take action, right? And action can be both from an advisory or a decision-making board. Advisory in the sense of providing recommendations. Decision is, for example, making a motion to take an action on an item. A lot of our boards have a dual function where they are advisory, but they are quasi kind of judicial in the sense that they can hear appeals on items, right? There are many our design review boards are an example. The Fire and Building Code Board of Appeals, right? They hear appeals from decisions from the building chief or the fire marshal. The Police and Fire Commission, they hear appeals from permit holders, from taxi cab, like nightclub dance permits. So they serve both, where they make a decision that can be eventually appealed. So any action they take would be something where it would be under a meeting and must be therefore followed by an action. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, here's kind of what I talked about, where what you actually break it down to, a collective decision by the majority, and a vote by the actual majority, whether it be a proposal, a recommendation, resolution, an order, ordinance, all that is covered under the Brown Act. Next slide, please. This is kind of important too, so in the back of your mind, the three things up there I have in caps, right? What does this apply? We're listening to staff reports, we're listening to presentations, which you do during the agenda, right? And you have a discussion. Doesn't require any action to be taken. It can be strictly a discussion on it. And then you deliberate afterwards about within this, as long as it's within the subject matter of the body. That's important to subject matter. Sometimes we'll get into emails and texts and everything else next. But I have found out if a board is talking about, let's say we have 3 or 4 board members, more than a quorum, talking about, let's say we have planning commission, talking about concerns of the police department and who's in the police chief, right? And you have 4 of the planning commissioners going emails back and forth on this issue. Even though you have a majority of it, even though under the law it looks like a Brown Act violation, it would not be, because the planning commission has no jurisdiction over the police department or the hiring process of police chief. So that's very important. You have a Brown Act, it must be on what the jurisdiction of this committee can be, right? So, you could have 4, you could have some board members befriend each other and talk about other issues via email or text. That's fine. It's like, we're not here to chill your communication, but where it must be chill is areas that you have jurisdiction over. And that is important to make. Sometimes people are like, we're not going to talk about anything. And as an attorney, like, that's fine, better safe than sorry. But I want to make it clear, it only applies when you're communicating with each other offline, if it's a subject matter that you have jurisdiction over. Next slide, please.
Can you, that's good news. Can you go a little bit
Yeah.
further, please? Because we've always been told that you can't talk about anything, including just talking about what should be on the agenda next time. So please tell us again, what do you mean by jurisdiction over?
Sure.
Yes. Or do we have any? Because we do have no financial stuff here. We pass no laws.
Right.
So
I'll
Help us out.
absolutely share, Marcy. You do have jurisdiction, the resolution does create that, and I'll go at the end of our presentation. But
okay.
you shouldn't be discussing aspects of the meeting, whether we should be on the agenda. The best practice I've always recommended is for the chair and the vice chair to meet with the staff member and if sometimes if the attorney team advises it, and to create the agenda for that next meeting. The other part I always recommend too is usually on the I haven't seen this agenda item, but usually there's like new items that a board member wants to propose. They can do that at that point of the meeting, right? For the next meeting, or maybe 3 meetings from now, sometime in like August, maybe we'd like to see this item there. Don't go discuss it substantively, just discuss that you'd like to, what the subject matter is and what you would like to see proposed on there. So for this board, obviously regarding anything regarding access for city projects, how city planning, everything regarding to that, I would not have discussions offline on it. But if you're going to discuss about other aspects of the city, like, example, like I said, the hiring of the police chief or a tax issue or something else like that, that in itself would not be a Brown Act violation because it doesn't deal with accessibility issues that this committee advises on. So does that make that more clear?
I'm not sure if it does or not.
Well, when you're discussing, the safest approach is if you're discussing anything new that can come up in a meeting that you may want to discuss or expound upon, don't talk about it like that.
Okay.
If it's something completely you'll never cover as part of this meeting, then that's not a Brown Act
Right.
violation.
Yeah, so I feel like some of the guidance we've received is almost like if 4 of us happen to ever be at the same event together, we can't even read each other.
No, and we'll get into that in our presentation too, in terms of events and how that works. But yeah, you can definitely read each other. Definitely
For
read each other.
clarification, I think you misspoke, so don't talk about a period, but I think you meant it with more than a quorum, with a quorum or more.
Correct. But then we'll get into also the dangers of even when you're talking less because of the spoken wheel and the chain and how that can occur and how it becomes problematic without any of you even knowing that a violation being committed. Next slide, please. So serial meetings, that's actually what we're getting into right now. So great. Thank you, Board Member Cruz. That's all right. Can you go back to the slide before, sorry. So serial meetings are unlawful, right? I'll read this one, it's important too. A majority of the members of a legislative body shall not, outside a meeting, use a series of communications of any kind directly or through intermediaries, right? So, council members may have that, and so we're very careful not to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business. Again, here's the important thing, that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body, right? So it's within your purview. At the end of this presentation, I did take what the 2021 resolution will discuss the purview and some of the challenges that you face on that purview too. I felt appropriate to discuss. Next slide, please. So what are the ways where you could have serial meetings, right? We have emails, text notes, I guess stone tablets too, phones, anything else like that. Any form of way you can communicate. Next slide, please. What do a chain and a wheel have in common? We'll go into that right now. Next slide, please. So here's a chain. Here's an example of what an unlawful serial meeting looks like. A to B, right? And then B to C and C to D. So let's say we have Chair Marston going to let's go to Committee Member Kuntz. And then, so that's the A to B. And then Committee Member Kuntz goes to Committee Member Tejada, right? That's B to C. And then Committee Member Tejada goes to Committee Member Luckett, right? So that's what we have a chain here. We have a communication that started with Chair Kuntz, went to Committee Member, Chair Marston, Committee Member Kuntz, Tejada to Luckett, right? A violation can occur with no knowledge of by A, B, and C or D. Because when Marston is talking to Kuntz, he's thinking, okay, we're less than a quorum, we're fine. But when as soon as Kuntz goes to Tejada, Chair Marston doesn't know that. No, now we're starting to creep up to the threshold. And then if Tejada goes to Commissioner Luckett, Commissioner Kuntz and Commissioner Marston did not know that. So all of a sudden, by happenstance, you have 4 members that are part of the same communication, hence a Brown Act violation. So that's why we always advise, when it comes to subject matter, don't, because you don't know if that communication is going to go to another committee member, and you may be out of the loop at that point. And by that time, 4, 5, 6 of the committee members may have gotten the same discussion and deliberated on, and would create a problem. Wagon wheel is kind of the same premise, but a different way it's organized, right? It goes A to B, so it can go from Marston to Kuntz, and then Marston to Tejada separately, right? And then A to D to Commissioner Luckett, right? A violation can occur without Commissioner Kuntz, Tejada, or Luckett knowing, because Marston is the sole communicator in this situation, right? And he's communicating individually. And so, he doesn't tell you, I'm plan on talking to Commissioner Tejada, Board Member Tejada, and Luckett. They don't know that also now we have 4 people implicated in the communication. So that's why it's so important. So you think of it like a spoke where Chair Marston in this example, and the only example, is the center of the spoke, and he's going outwards one-on-one. And when you look at a wheel of a spoke, all of a sudden you have 5, 6, 7 spokes, hence a Brown Act violation. The chain is A to B to C to D, just links to the chain as that information is passing along. So that's why we always encourage not to have these types of serial communications. Here's an important one, a new bill effective a year ago, AB 992. It's right now has a sunset period of 5 years. I can't imagine why it wouldn't be continued. It talks about stricter communications on social media platforms, right? It prohibits communications even between 2 members of a legislative body. So this is basically state law imposing this requirement on us. And it's interesting because I remember I would get a lot of questions before this bill came about how board members wanted to communicate using their social media, whether it be Instagram, Facebook, etc., to advertise events, advertise issues. And there was no law in the books. So my advice would be, you're just giving the messaging towards the public, maybe an agenda item, all that, go ahead and do that. But I strongly encourage you not to have discussions or dialogue when you have that message in Facebook through other members of the committee. Luckily, and that was just based on analysis of the Brown Act. Luckily, I was right. So we got in trouble on that. So it says it applies to any social media platforms. And I have there a bright line rule, right? A member cannot respond directly to any communication on the internet of a social media platform regarding, again, the keyword, the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body that's posted, shared by member. We're even talking about likes and everything else. I'll get into that in a second. Next slide, please, Liz. So what's permitted, so we know that, right? You can communicate with the public, letting them know next meeting, or letting them know an important, let's say the board sends an opinion letter to the council, you can let the public know about the advisory letter you're giving the council on this issue. So that's fine, not a problem. But you can, a majority may not use that social platform to discuss it. So obviously these features have a way you can have group conversations or et cetera. That's off limits. Do not do that. That would create a Brown Act violation. And a member may use social media to discuss personal matters with another member of the legislative body. So again, not this rule. You can say hi to someone, right? Or talk about something else, the sports, how the Dodgers do last night. That's fine. You're not going to be committing a Brown Act violation if Commissioner Marston and Coons and Tejada and Luckett were, worried about the upcoming Las Vegas Raiders season. You're not going to be violating that in the Brown Act. Next slide, please. What is prohibited, right? Cannot use it to discuss agency business with each other and directly not communicate with each other on the subject matter. That includes, for example, if Commissioner, let's say, Chair Marston put up, here's our recommendation letter to council, and Commissioner Coons and Tejada gave a thumbs up or like, because believe it or not, and why? That's considered speech. I have dealt with cases and analyzing issues on First Amendment rights, employee rights, and everything else. And postings of something, a thumbs up or a like, by case law in California and now other jurisdictions has been defined as communicative speech. So that's why the legislature put that law in there. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, could you go a little bit further on that? You said this is speech and therefore what?
Therefore, the rule prohibiting each other speaking each other in agency business, don't even do a like. So let's say you post, we have a meeting up to discuss an important issue that we want to advise council on, put on the agenda. You put it out on your Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? Board member Coons should not give a like or thumbs up to it. Just leave it alone.
Okay.
That's it. That's again, state law imposing this requirement.
That kind of comes into when you said you shouldn't have a discussion, but I'm allowed to say, I just ran into a real terrible parking situation on Lower State Street. I can put that on any.
You can put that on there.
And Nick can say, I went down there and saw something different.
Nick should not say.
But we're not discussing it. We're just making
Doesn't-
statements.
Even with, it doesn't matter discussion, statements are discussion. If the legislature determines a like or a thumbs up, that's not a discussion back and forth, but that is the type of speech. So if you were to put something up there, it should not have any kind of discussion on that. If that's an issue that this board wants to put on the agenda, that is the time to discuss that issue. But should not be doing it by having, putting a like and everything else on that.
Okay, but I'm just saying, if I put it on there first and then 5 minutes later, Nick has a problem, doesn't know that I even put it on Twitter, and he writes something about parking, is that a discussion between he and I? We don't even know we're talking. There's a huge universe
You're
out
talking
there.
about the same instance?
A separate post, maybe.
Yeah, I think he's talking about separate posts. I think this is all kind of a moot point because I'm probably the only one on here who engages in social media.
That, I do, but I not really with the city yet.
Yeah, I don't engage with anybody else here. I do have a related question though. I do occasionally post op-eds in local print media and online media that relate to the subject matter. And am I correct in understanding that other board members are not free to give a contrary opinion via op-ed in that same media?
Committee member Cruz, you're correct. They are not. They are not. And again, it goes back to what the purpose, the first slide, right? The public record, the Brown Act is for the benefit and transparency of the public, right? Council appointed you and felt obviously all through credentials, experience, all worthy to be ones to give advice to the city staff, city council on these issues. And the time to do that, so the council, so the public knows what you're talking about, when you're talking about, have input, can provide public comment, everything else is during the course of these meetings. It's for the benefit of the public. And that's why I was mentioning the rules, or even sometimes maybe the inconvenience of things. That's why we have these rules and regulations. And so while it may sound like, oh, really? And I can understand, I empathize. That's how I have it.
Mr. Gomez, I'm a little confused. This committee is strictly in an advisory capacity, so there's no conflict of interest as far as finances or any of those areas. Why do we, it seems like our communication is almost stymied by some of these rules that we can't even communicate with each other in terms of things that we're concerned about. None of us on this committee has imposed undue influence on another committee member. I think we all get along, but we all want to communicate with each other in terms of the stuff that we're talking about. And I agree that Mr. Marston and I probably should meet with Ms. Yu on a more regular basis to talk about the agenda, maybe set some agenda items and things like that. But it seems like some of these rules just really stymie our communication.
Vice Chair Burton, I understand that, but even as an advisory committee, you still must follow the requirements of the Brown Act. And as I mentioned in the first slide, the communication is the sunshine law. Let the sun shine in on the city business, even if it's an advisory committee. The public needs to hear the deliberations, the points of view. You know, the Brown Act before the Brown Act, why it was written before was the old days of, you know, a lot of big cities, not just California, but other places, where you have your backroom deals. I'm not saying this commission, but you have your backroom deals, things were discussed, handshake down, you come on open session, there was no discussion, nothing else. Something was voted upon, the public's like, well, how do they arrive to that conclusion? Where did this even come from?
But in that case, would it be possible to have a public email list of some sort that the public could be on?
No, not at all. So these rules are important because they are for these committees and all that. Again, I was mentioning inconvenience, but there are no exceptions to this. So if you're discussing, we're discussing the upcoming sports season, that's one thing. We can all do that. But if you're discussing issues pertaining to the city, pertaining to accessibility, you cannot do that regarding majority. And that's why we discourage, as I mentioned, the spoken wheels serial meetings, whether it be a spoken wheel example or a chain example, because you know where that communication is going amongst yourself. It must be done in public during these meetings. And there's no exception.
Right, but yeah, I guess I mean that there could be additional meetings that could be written, and a lot of other non-government committees do that.
And what can you give me an example?
So like an email list that the public could subscribe to where people would talk about that, and maybe that would constitute a meeting, but it would be public.
No, it would not in terms of that, because meetings are something that for this committee, that since we're a regular advisory board meeting, there must be an agenda, must be regularly posted, we'll discuss it. There must be access, all these things. So when you're doing it via that modem, you're denying the public all those rights. So you can't do it via an email or anything else, right? And the thing about it is, maybe you have an idea of some people interested now, for example, or I have a list of, people who regularly attend are very interested in this issue. But there are many people that don't, and maybe one day they see an agenda perusing it. Oh, I see the Access Advisory Committee has a meeting in June on this, and I see, here's an issue that I'm interested in. They've never been aware of this committee or anything else, and they come for the first time. That's what this law is for, to allow people who maybe aren't even aware to one time come across it and see an issue that they have a concern to them to attend. Again, I go back to it, I hearken to it strongly. The benefit of this law is not for the convenience of the board or the city staff, because frankly, it isn't convenient. It is for the benefit of the public, and that's why we must strictly follow those rules. Next, any other questions on this issue?
Well, I need a clarification. If I see a newspaper article that I think is interesting to our group, am I allowed to send that out with no comment at all, just say, here's an article?
I would not post it to the group. If you post it, if you put it on, if your Facebook page, for example, is public and you just make it public and a board member happens to see it and look at it, great. But what I wouldn't do is, here's an article, let me email the group so they're aware of it. Don't do that. That's
But that's in the
communication.
public domain.
what I'm trying to say is, I understand it's in the public domain, Chair Luckett. What I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to do in this speech is avoid you from committing Brown Act violations for the public. What I'm saying is Chair Marston can post an interesting article, right? And you can follow Chair Marston on Facebook. What I'm saying Chair Marston should not do is email to the other 6 members of the board, hey, look at this article or anything like that. If they find it upon themselves in the public domain, and the rest of you, let's say you do follow his Facebook page and you see the article, there's not a problem there. But where the problem occurs is where Chair Marston is specifically trying to target, here's an email, make sure you read this. Or here, I'm sending this to you without even any comment, right? Because you want to avoid those circumstances. And when you read that article, what you don't want to do is on his Facebook page, post a like, emoji, or anything else. And this is state law. This is the city of Santa Barbara's rules. These are our rules. This is what the state law, the Brown Act and 992 have imposed upon us, and we must strictly follow.
So Mr. Doimus, in lieu of emails and that sort of internal communication with the committee, I guess, because we've been striving for years, so how do we reach out to people in the disabled community, for example, who may not know about us? I'm hoping that the new website that the city is creating will create more of a public arena that this information can be displayed and presented in such a way that it's not violating the Brown Act, but somehow it reaches out and gets to these people who may not have heard about us, but who may want to come to a meeting or give us public comment, however.
Vice Chair, you make a very good question. I'm able to answer that, which I really hope provides clarity in this issue. You can advocate for this board all you want. You can post, you can talk to people in the public, you can, we can put it on the city's website. You can be in the grocery store, seeing someone in line, having a conversation, by the way, do you know about this committee? You can have, all those things you can do. You are free to advertise and publicize the works of this board all you want. The only prohibition is communicating with each other. The rest of you one-on-one with the public, of course you can do that.
But don't you mean if it's more than 3, when you say communicating with each other, don't you mean more than 3 people? The
More than
forum?
3 people, except.
Okay, because
except-
you're leaving that out of the
No,
discussion,
may I
to the
finish?
point that it's inhibiting us from picking up the phone and talking to 1 or 2 other people.
May I finish the thing? So the regards to social media, the state law prohibits members, doesn't require a quorum, right? So it could be Chair Marston posting something and Commissioner Committee Member Cruz likes it. That right there is a violation of 992. You can't do it. Doesn't require. a
And
quorum.
what, will we be jailed or fined?
Both.
I mean, seriously.
But it's only social media. That's the difference.
I understand the frustration, and that is
I mean,
why.
we are not a legislative, we don't make rules. We don't make rules, we
I-
suggest to the city.
I understand that, but when you agree to accept a membership on this board, you must follow the provisions of the Brown Act. Again, like I harken back, that is why I start off with my first slide. The purpose of it is not for the convenience or have conversations with each other to promote something internally. It must be done out in the open. It must be, and those requirements must be followed. We don't go around doing, the Brown Act applies to this board and committee, right? I am not at all suggesting stifling communication with each other regarding issues that are not covered in this jurisdiction.
I think all of us are gonna leave here going, I can't ever talk to anybody else on the phone again.
I don't know how I'm doing that when I'm explaining it, but I will go on. to the next.
The social media, the difference, social media might be a confusing statement because, like, if people who aren't on social media might think that it means phone as well, or email, but it's a different category.
I understand, and that's why this new law was here for clarification. It's there for 5 years. It expires in 2026. It doesn't require a quorum. Again, it's not the city that's drafting these laws. It's the state legislature. And the Brown Act also came from the state legislature. And you don't look for a quorum for 992. You look at no member social media should be used to advocate and publicize. That is not a problem, but 2 members should not be using that modem to talk to each other. And my opinion here is I'm here to present, I'm sorry if there's frustration, but I'm here to present the law. Convening staff have not written this is the way the law is, how it should be followed. I strongly encourage no one to commit Brown Act violation. I've said you can discuss matters that are this only pertains to matters within your subject matter jurisdiction, not without it. Now, when you want to, I expressed also on my slide the danger of when one of you pick up the phone and talk to the other. That in itself is not. But what happens is there may be conversations that you don't know what's going on with the chain and link, and all of a sudden at the end.
So therefore, we can't do that. We shouldn't pick up the
It's,
phone and talk to each
it's
other.
advisable not because you don't know where that communication goes amongst each other. So what happens is, let's say a member of the public or something happens that finds out that there was a whole chain email that maybe went individually, but went amongst each other one-on-one. It was the same subject matter, same issue, 5 of you were on it. Commissioner, well, I didn't know. All I did was communicated with Chair Marston. I didn't know any other was involved. It doesn't matter. That is why I stress, because no one does know where it could go or could lead
So how
to.
does that translate, that chain thing?
I'm sorry, Chair
into-
Marston, in the interest of time, can we please advance the agenda? And if we need to follow up with the city attorney's office individually on clarity, can I suggest we do that?
Thank you. I will, next slide. Please. Slide before that. Again, where you can do this, community meetings, right? You don't have to worry about the Brown Act. Majority attendance, it's an open publicized meeting to discuss a local community concern, right? No worry about that. All of you can be present at a community. All of you can be present at a city council meeting. Just don't have sidebar discussions during that meeting. You can all attend, not a problem. Again, open meeting of another legislative body, all of you can attend a planning commission meeting. Exactly. There's no prohibition. Oh, I see 3 here. I better walk out the door. All 7 can attend a planning commission meeting if you want. Just again, only rule, no sidebar discussions, right? That's all. Then ceremonial event, right? Social ceremonial. You can all attend. It could be a party, right? All we could be there. There's no prohibition on that. Just no sidebar discussions on matters within your jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction. Next slide, please. There's another exception that's important. The Brown Act doesn't apply to meetings regarding employees, staff meetings, obviously. So if I have our office has a staff meeting, that wouldn't apply. It doesn't also apply to when staff passes the document. So what staff may do is email you all the agenda. All 7 of you may be on the email, but that's not a Brown Act violation because it's coming from staff to all of you. Now, there shouldn't be discussions from that replies, oh, let's talk about this item on the agenda or that. Just save it for the meeting when you get that, right? Or if I were to give an advisory opinion on something, I can send it to all 7 of you, right? Not a problem at one time, not a Brown Act violation. If there was a discussion about it and wanted more clarification, then the simple way to deal with that is just agendize it and we can do it out, that's how that would be handled. Next slide, please. Teleconference meeting. I know there's some interest in this a lot, meetings can be teleconference, audio, video. We must post agendas on all the telephone conference locations. So if I'm doing it at, now this was suspended during COVID, but now the requirements are back in place. So if I were to teleconference somewhere, let's say my house or anywhere else I might be, I would have to post the agenda of where I'm at. And I must allow members of the public to attend, so you observe the meeting and give public comment. So I would joke, well, I'll do that with a council member, bring a bunch of like Kool-Aid to stain the carpet and everything else to make sure. If you're gonna not be at the meeting, you must post the agenda and you must post it where you're located and allow members of the public to attend. I know it's rare occasions that happens, but we also need to know for staff time, we also need to know if there's ever a situation where you can't attend but only teleconferencely. We remember the requirement agenda items are posted 72 hours in advance. So we need to know those addresses, all those things to put that in the agenda.
Mr. Gomez, can you tell me which members of council's homes are fully accessible?
You know what? That's a very interesting question. I do not know the answer to that.
Can you find out? Because if they're going to be working remotely, on meetings, they have to be accessible. And I'm sure that, you know, we're going to be held to the same standard, so.
That would be, I don't know in terms of where the accessibility lies. If there's a question for that, especially since Mr. Kalam advises the city council, I would address that with Mr. Kalam.
Okay, I guarantee none of them have accessible bathrooms. And so I would say that no city council member has a fully accessible home and can participate via remote.
I understood. Like I said, that would be a question. How would you do that?
So my point here is not to be obtuse. It's for fairness of process.
Understood.
All of us here are told we can't participate remotely because our home's not fully accessible and agendized unless it is. And my concern is that any member of city council who's participating from home today is in violation.
There's also a quorum shall participate from locations within the city. So let's say you have people in different states, you still must have at least 4 members during teleconferencing, like for city council or a board of 7 to be at least teleconferencing from within the city. Next slide, please. The agendas are kind of real simple. Agendas are required. Agendas are required for this board. We have one right here. Discussion is generally limited to, obviously, we'll get into rare situations, items on the agenda. Meetings must be held in the city, as I mentioned before, most limited circumstances. And then we have special meeting rules that apply in really serious situations that would reduce the noticing requirements from 72 to 24 hours. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the agenda requirements, 72 hours are general before a meeting. We must post it, contain a brief description of it. Doesn't have to exceed 20 words, but there must be some description to it. Don't need to go into all of it. And the agenda must specify the time, location of where the meeting is, and the publicly accessible location, and post it also on the city's website per the government code. Next slide, please. Again, discussion is limited to items on the agenda. There was a case I kind of put in stars there. The LA County District Attorney's Office found that Inglewood violated state law in regards to a special meeting involving Los Angeles Clippers, but the DA declined to take any action. But as I mentioned, it must be generally limited. There's some exceptions, which we're going to right now. Next slide, please. All right. You may briefly respond to statements made to or questions posed by persons exercising their public testimony rights. So I saw that today with Mr. Railing. That's perfectly fine. You may ask for clarification, a brief announcement, or to make a brief report of your own activities that you're doing regarding that pertain or relate to the jurisdiction of this board. Next slide, please. You also may provide reference to staff for factual information or request staff to look something up and get back at a subsequent meeting. That's perfectly fine. And you may ask staff to place an item on the business for a future agenda. Usually I like to have on my board meetings, a place for that, a placeholder for that, where members can do that. Again, for that, be careful, don't go into substantive discussions on that issue, but just discuss, I would like to see this item and a brief, maybe statement of why, and that's it, limit to that. A lot of times for those things, members, items may be added between 2/3 of the members to vote. Next slide, please. Special meetings, those are different. Those only require a shortened noticing period of 24 hours with the majority members of the body. We must deliver notice to members, each paper, radio, television, post on the city's website. So it requires more rigorous noticing requirements. Again, noticing the time, location of it. No other business shall be considered by the legislative body. So if there is a special meeting, it's for that 1 or 2 issues that the special meeting is being called for. There's no public comment even of stuff outside that special meeting. It really strictly is limited to the issues for that special meeting is being called for. Next slide, please. Attendance, right? One important thing is there's no requirement. I see it sometimes. I always get nervous. I'm not saying that I've never appeared before this board before, but there's no requirements to compel people's names or signing in or registering is strictly voluntary. But if a public person gives a public comment, a chair, someone should not ask, well, can you please tell us your name? Just they can announce it themselves if they want to, or state who they are, but there's no requirement. And the reason why is you don't want to create a chilling effect for members of the public. Next slide, please. There's a right to record meetings, so people can do that, everything else. We have and the reason that's important to put in the statute is because California has an eavesdropping law that's more strict than a lot of states. It usually means you need to get the consent of all parties, not just two or anything else, everyone in that room. There's an expectation of privacy. There's no expectation of privacy here when you're in a public meeting. It's public, and the statute makes it very clear, even if there was any doubt, that you can record such meetings. Next slide, please. Public participation, right, versus regular versus special meeting. Every agenda for regular meetings must allow the public to address the legislative body on any items of interest before that. And every special meeting must allow the public to directly address the legislative body for an item described in the notice. So as I mentioned before, when you have your regular meeting, there's a time for public comment. Number 4 we see here, they can talk about anything, member of the public raising an issue or concern that's within the jurisdiction of this body. For a special meeting, it's only limited to what the special meeting is being called for, the reason for it. Next slide, please. Rules for public participation, again, shall not prohibit public criticism of policies, procedures. Again, no chilling. There's no chilling of the public in terms of how they want to respond. There are case law where someone gave in a city council meeting, a Nazi salute. That's considered protected speech, right? An important rule sometimes I see public comments, not a time for a debate. So generally, if you have someone antagonistic or something else, we'll try to avoid a back and forth, let them say their piece for the 3 minutes, and that's it. Next slide, please. Meeting disruption, if we were ever to face such an occurrence, if order cannot be restored, what would happen is the procedure would be for the chair to call for the meeting to be briefly taking a break, and then meeting room cleared and resuming it in session. That's one of the most important things. Representatives of the press, media, etc., shall be allowed to attend any session. They shouldn't obviously cause a disturbance, just like other members of the public. Next slide, please. Finally, closed sessions. This board doesn't have to worry about this in terms of the jurisdiction you cover, but I thought I would just mention it. Everything has to be in public. And so, like as I mentioned before, kind of the base of my presentation, right? There are 5 exceptions that you would go in, allowed to go in closed session to discuss. So the public cannot see what's going on. Those 5 are personnel matters, right? You must have the ability to appoint or terminate. I'll explain why that's important in a second. Litigation, if you're discussing a potential litigation case or already a case that's been filed, for example, city council can go in closed session to discuss that to protect the sanctity of attorney-client privilege. Labor negotiations are another thing. So let's say we're discussing fire department, police, and labor negotiators, which are one out that would go into council and discuss kind of the back and forth of what's happened, strategy, what's the top offer I can give, etc. Real property negotiations in terms of city acquiring, and a rare one I've never seen, a public security threat, to discuss that. Any leak that comes out of a closed session is a violation of the government code that could be prosecuted as a misdemeanor. The violation is the person who leaks, not the person who receives information. That's who the violator is. As I was mentioning, it kind of goes into my final point about the resolution. So I don't know if you're all familiar with the Community Formation Commission. They were appointed in a year ago, about 15 months ago, after George Floyd tragedy, regarding making a potential recommendation to the city council to some type of civilian oversight committee. They were given one task, a little bit over a year. They did incredible work in terms of the amount of work and product they produced, a huge report. And we were discussing some of the issues, and 2 things come out I think is important. One thing they wanted to do was potentially consider imposing discipline on officers, but our charter prohibits that. Our charter prohibits anyone besides the city administrator, his or her delegate, to make recommendations or prohibit. It even strictly prohibits the city council. And this rule was established in the sixties to prevent patronage and all that, the hiring or firing or political process of city staff. So because the city council can't do it, the subsequent board can't, so they would have no basis to go in closed session. Then if they wanted to review personnel records of an officer, they would have to do so in open session. But state law prohibits disclosure of that. It would be a police officer bill of rights violation. So that was just one issue. But an important issue that came up for this commission to consider is to take on such an important task, budgeting was a concern. Right?
Excuse me, Mr. Dimas, in the
Yeah.
interest of time,
Sure,
we can't have any closed meetings for this group anyway.
No, exactly.
Can we skip over that?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention one thing in terms of the resolution. And here is what the board is allowed to do is act as an advisory committee. One of the biggest constraints that a board has, and I recognize with all the boards, is limited funding. It makes it difficult times. This is a lot of times a strain on staff, et cetera. So when we look at things, it's important to recognize, we were talking about efficiency, even my efficiency on my speech here, to deal with subject matter jurisdictions that are covered by that, and to work with staff and understanding when we have these recommendations, when staff brings back and forth, that the biggest key on that is, limitation on resources to understand what needs to be done, when it needs to be done. And I think this resolution does a perfect job in terms of as a guiding light of where this commission can go and do. So that completes my presentation. I thank everyone for your time.
The part I thought that we were promised was the enforcement and penalties.
Oh, well, in terms of Brown Act violations?
Yeah, because first of all, I asked, but no one answered. How many Brown Act violations do you have in Santa Barbara City in the last 10 years?
Zero.
Pardon?
Zero.
Okay, fine. So there's no police out there looking at anyone's email or phone calls,
Well,
right?
there are members of the public. There have been members of the public that have reported Brown
Okay.
Act violations, and the district attorney has.
See, the things sound so draconian and yet nothing happens with it. And since we don't even handle money or make processes, it's pretty weird that I can't send a newspaper article to 5 people and just say, hey, check
It is
this
what it
out.
is. Let's move on. It's-
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, I want to make sure there was no penalties going on
Well,
here.
we all know that this is a paper tiger, and I'm concerned about the other agenda items that
Okay.
are far more important to me.
Thank you for your
Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
information. Can we send it to Ashley to be sent out to us or on the website or something?
Said what?
We will include the presentation in the minutes that are posted.
Thank you. I know we're short on time, but can I take a 4-minute break?
Sure.
Person? Or would it only be 2 + 2?
Number 10. Ashley, you're going to give us a report on dining.
Yes, Chair Marston. Liz, are we all set to go reconvene? Okay,
Can I
thank
give you
you.
10 minutes or less? How long?
It shouldn't take long
Okay,
to provide the report. Unfortunately, downtown staff was not available to attend today due to conflicts to give the report themselves, but I'm able to give a report on the status of our ADA enforcement and the progress that we've made since the last AAC meeting, particularly for the parklets on the State Street Promenade. So let me get my notes. We have done, and I personally participated in the first 2 of 3 rounds of ADA inspections within the State Street Promenade of the parklet facilities. And we brought our CASP consultant that we have an on-call contract with to participate as our technical advisor for performing these inspections. After the 3 rounds, one was in March, one was in April, one was in May, we have 24 of the 44 businesses that are now compliant. 18 are still not compliant and 2 were closed or not open for business at the time that the inspections took place.
Point of clarification, we're obviously not talking citywide. We know that this problem is far greater than
Yes,
And so is this just in,
this is the promenade on State Street, so, it is between
500.
the 500 and 1200 blocks.
okay,
And that will be a future, phase of getting inspections scheduled for the rest of the parklets off of the promenade.
Real quick, you said 14 are in compliance.
24 are in compliance.
24 now.
So
Okay,
we're a little over 50%.
okay.
It's not obviously where we would like to be. We want it to be at 100%. But given the amount of effort that we've put in over the last few months, it is good to see that we do have, we have more businesses complying, and we're just over 50% right now. The most common violations that we saw was not providing an accessible table. And it's usually due to insufficient distance between the table legs. So that was really the most common violation, as well as others related to not providing a compliant ramp for those that are at the street level, or issues with a transition between surfaces where there's too big of a lip or tripping hazard. So those were the most common issues that we observed.
can you provide us with the list that are allegedly in compliance now?
Yes, I can provide that list. I just received an updated list last night from the last round. The next step is that, well, administrative citations were issued this week for 3 of the businesses from the first round of follow-ups that were not in compliance. And the next, the citations from the second round will be given, those will be going out next week, and they'll be given a second abatement date. And the failure to correct after the second abatement date will result in a third citation and abatement date. And then at that point, any businesses that are not compliant after the third abatement date will be required to remove their facilities from the right of way. And if they do not voluntarily remove them from the right of way, the city has the permission to remove the facilities and back charge the business for the cost of removing.
Can you help me understand how that new policy was arrived at?
I believe that this is the city's administrative citation policy that has been in place for some time.
Okay, I guess it's been in place for some time. What was the impetus for, how did we shift in actually doing what we said we could do? Now when I think we've been in a position to do this for at least a year. And now we've, in the last week, I guess, we're now issuing citations, and I'm wondering what changed.
Committee member Kuntz, I can't really speak to what happened in the past before I became involved.
What happened last week that the policy from the city administrator's office on enforcement changed and allowed the citations to be written and pursued.
Oh, I see your question. We were developing the template citation language with the city attorney's office for quite some time.
Yeah, we got a presentation on that a year ago that it was done.
I believe there were some changes based on the updated ERETO. But those citations were finalized, and we're able to now send them out. So they are going out, and some have gone out.
Just to be clear, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm not trying to be critical of your efforts. I'm trying to understand the process so that this committee can be efficient in reaching this kind of conclusion earlier in future efforts, right? Because we spun our wheels, we got stonewalled for 2 years on this. I know that's not your fault. I know you had nothing to do with any of that. But we are struggling to understand the process that goes on within city administration, where the limitations are, and what our paths to resolution are. And so I want, is it the idea that this committee might present a resolution that got the attention of city staff. I just want to understand what changed.
Mr. Coons, let me point out that I think last fall that Brian met with the attorney and they did say this was in place. They just never used it before.
Right. And-
Okay,
and what-
but
why
and now
use
it's
it
still
now?
in place, but it still hasn't been used. So nothing's changed in the last 6 months. Well, I was gonna ask, how many fines have you guys actually done? You know, when I was a little kid and got in trouble, I was put in the room or grounded right away. They didn't give me 4 months to figure out whether I want to obey mom and dad. And I don't understand why the business people in this community get all the benefit of making all this money on public property and not have to even pay a fine.
Okay,
So
obviously,
have we had fines?
So there are fines associated with the citations. They are low admittedly. The first citation comes with $100 fine. The second citation comes with a $250 fine. But really
But
what's
that's not
going
per
to
day,
get the
right?
attention of the
Yeah.
businesses is the consequence, if they don't comply after the third, is that their facility has to be removed
Yeah.
and they're no longer able to use the public right of way. And we've seen that be effective with the, when we had the order to clear the sidewalks
Yeah,
of
that worked right away.
obstructions.
Yeah.
And, you know, to be quite frank, some businesses were fine, fine is the wrong word. They were okay with just paying
Yeah.
continuous fines
Yeah.
because,
Yep.
it was. worth
it wasn't
to them.
getting their attention,
It
but
was worth
it was-
The cost of business.
it was the, you know, the consequence of having to remove their facilities altogether that ultimately gained the compliance. And so that's the tool that we have with us, that we're using through this administrative citation process.
So my feedback on this to staff and up to the city administrator is that these fines are too low and the citations are coming too infrequently.
Okay, let's try to finish up.
Yeah. Member Asher,
Yes.
do you by any chance post the violation somewhere for the public to see that they're in violation? Is that ever done?
Committee member Luckett, they're not posted publicly. And I would have to check with the attorney's office on whether that,
We don't dare to shame any restaurant owner in town by doing that.
yeah,
That would be too shameful.
Okay,
well,
Okay,
is there more to your?
but that was essentially my update. And, you know, like I said, we know it's not perfect and we know that our efforts have been focused on the State Street Promenade. And our next phases will be scheduling for off of the promenade. And I did want to know, it has been a significant work effort for staff and we've brought in our consultant. And so we are, as Mr. Duenas mentioned, pretty resource constrained right now. I know within my division alone, I've got a 20% vacancy. So we're doing our best with what we have to accommodate and really be as proactive on these enforcements as we can be.
We appreciate all your hard work.
Yeah, it's recognized. I see the effort you're putting forward and I appreciate it very much.
yes, I do. I want to make one statement. We talk about resources. We don't find anyone, it's $100, which is nothing. We have all the money we spent on your salary and the other people from downtown park. We have to pay the cast people $300 or $400 an hour per person or whatever it is. We're spending all this money to get pretty bad results. And yet we don't even find these people to pay the bills. So no wonder there's nobody to go out there and look, because it's a waste of money to go. The more time you spend looking, the more money we spend. Meanwhile, the restaurant owners get the benefit.
I
So-
think the results were pretty good last time. I heard there were only 12 compliant or 14 and now we're up to 24. So we're getting there. I think
Right.
We're making good progress.
But there's still nothing off of State Street. I mean, we need to have more effort. Okay,
So Karen, just to put in perspective, that about 50% of a very small part of the city is compliant now after 2 years. That's the problem. We knew this was going to be a civil rights violation before the ordinance was passed. And we begged the council not to pass the ordinance without putting in protections. And okay, we got another 12 in the last quarter since our last meeting, but that's just not enough. And I appreciate the limitations of staff. Council needs to allocate more resources.
There was one accessibility issue I noticed the other day was that if you're on street proper, a lot of them are sort of fenced off with rails. You can't get into them. So sometimes you have to walk several hundred feet up onto the sidewalk of the state street to get into them. And I'm wondering if entrance from the street can be part of accessibility. Because if you have a surgery foot
It is part of
or a bad back, or you're in a wheelchair, walking that extra 100, 200, 500 feet is sometimes a challenge.
You're
So
absolutely right. And
Do you understand? Were you noticing that the access wasn't directly from State Street on a lot of them?
Committee member Luckett, we were not looking specifically for businesses to provide access both from the sidewalk and from the street level. We were focused on the access directly from the sidewalk.
So
Since that's the designated pedestrian path is the sidewalk.
this committee initially gave downtown parking feedback that one or the other. If your parklet was at grade level, street level, you had to have a ramp from the curb down, or you had to have access from the street in, and that's not been enforced. But this should have been covered in the CASP's guidance, and if that's something that's not being evaluated for compliance today, then I would say that maybe these 24 that you think are compliant are not.
Committee member Coons, you bring up a good point, and I would add in a revision to my previous statement is there are some that do accommodate access from the street because they are at street level, and some are utilizing a city compliant ramp because it's within close enough proximity. Some businesses were attempting to say that they were using a city ramp for their access, but it was too far away, and it would have required somebody that needed that accommodation to go too far out of their way. And that was not considered compliant. So those were addressed.
Do we have a minimum or maximum of how far away you can be from the city ramps or from the counters?
Chair Marston, there's not a set standard.
Okay.
It is really dependent on ensuring that the accessible access is not any farther than the access for non-disabled access.
Okay,
If
thank
that
you.
makes sense.
I think Nick wants to, leave the vitamin chip.
I think we have public comment on this agenda item.
We do have public comment from Mr. Donald Chan.
Hello, I'm Donald Chan. I've been a lifelong resident of Santa Barbara County. And first of all, I came down here just to check out the great work you as a committee have been doing. And I'm just thankful for you serving and working towards inclusion in Santa Barbara for all people. And just to give you an example, a couple of years ago, my workplace and I worked with the city to provide sidewalk access to my place of work because I wasn't able to access my workplace because there was no sidewalk over there. But anyway, I just want, even though there, as far as this subject goes, for the State Street Promenade, although there have been improvements, we're up to 50%, but in 2 years, we can do a lot better. So, you know, I want to continue to encourage you just to advocate and work with the city to motivate the city to raise the citation fines. I do think they're too low. And to get these restaurants into compliance. Many of the solutions are very, very simple, and it shouldn't take this long. So again, I want to thank you for the work you do, and let's get State Street accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald.
Thank you.
Okay, Nick.
The second issue, I'm hoping that this update will include not only restaurants, but outdoor business facilities. There may be some that, I don't know how many, but there may be some that have a park of some sort that is not necessarily a restaurant, but whose part of the facility needs to be accessible.
Yes, Vice Chair Burnham, we did look at all facilities. There are a few that are not restaurants. And I believe we did find that they were accessible, the few that do exist that are not restaurants.
Thank you.
Mr. Coons, I think we're ready for you on your discussion of the resolution. Do you want me to hand out those sheets?
I want to make a couple of, opening comments before we get distracted by the handout that I've prepared for staff to distribute. Since I suggested this resolution, I took the initiative to prepare a draft for consideration. And since our meeting schedule severely limits our efficacy, I tried to prepare a draft that would not be at all controversial in the hopes that it would gain unanimous support quickly. This is the wrong slide. That's for a later, it's for a later update. So I prepared copies that everyone can follow along with. And if staff could pass those out. This is our draft resolution of the Access Advisory Committee of the City of Santa Barbara regarding outdoor business arrangements. Whereas in May of 2020, the City Council received the COVID-19 Business Advisory Task Force recommendation to assist businesses. Whereas
Excuse me, Nick, didn't you want them to make notes on if they,
if anybody has notes or concerns about any of these, please take note and let me know when I'm done reading.
okay.
Whereas several members of the Access Advisory Committee expressed concerns to the City Council and City Administrator that the recommendation did not adequately protect the civil rights of disabled community members. Whereas this COVID-19 Business Advisory Task Force recommendation has led to the adoption of municipal ordinances, which now constitute a service, program, or activity. Whereas it has been 2 years since the City of Santa Barbara City Council directed city staff to allow businesses in the city to expand their sales and services into new outdoor business areas in the public right of way. Whereas all the businesses in Santa Barbara that have taken advantage of this new program are public accommodations as defined under both state and federal accessibility law. Whereas after 2 years of persistent advocacy by the members of the AAC, only a minority of these public accommodations operating in the public right of way are fully accessible to people with disabilities. Whereas this constitutes discrimination, both by the businesses and by the city, against people with disabilities. Whereas these civil rights violations are occurring citywide, and the ineffective enforcement efforts have been limited to a few blocks of State Street. Be it resolved that the City of Santa Barbara Access Advisory Committee hereby expresses its disappointment and its objection to the lack of accessibility of the outdoor business areas operating in the public right of way throughout the city. Believes that the City of Santa Barbara has undermined the civil rights of its disabled community members. Requests that council allocate sufficient funding, resources, and direction to resolve these injustices and civil rights violations without further delay. Anybody have any feedback on, anything in here that they're not comfortable with? Does anybody here have any feedback on anything that, they think is missing from this? That I recognize we could get mired down in a long discussion about the ideal resolution. But I think because of the constraints of this committee, it's important to pass something, even if it's not all that we would hope, even if it's just a first shot. And I would be open to, of course, continuing this discussion and coming back with another resolution if we thought we needed more.
Mr. Coons, I think the whereas clauses spell out the sort of the history and the backdrop of what this is about. But I think the most important resolve clause is the last one, that we strongly advocate the city council provide more funding, more resources.
And direction like fines, other enforcement.
I like the fact that you didn't get real negative to the council about all the real problems we've seen and the people who have stopped it all. It seems to be very truthful and fairly positive as far as where we stand without going to the details. So I kind of like that. Good work.
Yes.
Would anybody object to a vote to pass this resolution by the AAC?
Could I ask Suzanne to just give us any comments she had? Because since you work on this kind of stuff and you're an architect, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I mean, I, everything that is included here so far, I had no objections to it. It wasn't like, no, I don't really have any comment, actually. It's good.
I'd like to move that we, as a committee, pass this resolution pending maybe some looking at it for maybe a final draft, maybe Nick, if you want.
My concern is if we need another draft, it'll be another quarter before this is passed. So if we have problems, let's address them now.
I just had a general question. What is the purpose of this resolution? It's just stating our opinions.
So again, a resolution is a formal expression of opinion, will, or intent from an official body that often addresses a matter of special or temporary nature. It is probably the most official statement that this body can make.
It's on the record.
You know, this was suggested at the last meeting by Nick, and to me, we as a group have expressed these opinions for 2 years and haven't gotten very far. So I think the idea was to get something in writing from the group, telling them this is what's really going on. You've heard it all before, but here it is in a statement. Is that kind of your idea, Nick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the minutes of these meetings over the last 2 years don't reflect everything that we've said or any of this. You know, the minutes are very cursory, they're high level. We perhaps we could have made this a letter and asked staff to present it to council. But I think this is the most the best vehicle we have at our disposal to put this position on record.
I move we pass the resolution as is.
I would make a change in paragraph 2 to be, whereas several members of the Access Advisory Committee expressed concern to the city council and city administrator that the recommendations did not adequately, I would put instead of protect, allow accessibility to the business that had been affected by changes that were COVID related. So I would delete protect the civil rights to just say allow accessibility. to the
Can I ask, would you object to passing this resolution without that change?
And I have a thought, what would this resolution bring about? What are we hoping to get done with this
It is my
resolution?
hope that this will bring greater attention to our position on this subject, and I hope that the fact that this position is become more public record would motivate staff and council to do more.
I would agree with passing it, yes, and hopefully have a one-on-one discussion with city council too. I would like a meeting.
There's nothing stopping us from pursuing further dialogue with council.
So that was one of my questions was, would you or somebody from this committee go to city council public comment and bring this resolution?
I think it will be known to council if it's passed. I don't know that we need to.
Chair Marston, if I may interject,
Yes, you may.
I was actually wondering the same thing in terms of process, whether you would be requesting that city staff provide the resolution via a memo to council and the city administrator's office, or if the committee would be presenting the resolution.
I think it would be fine for staff to present.
Yes, I can forward if adopted by the committee today, I can via memo submit this to the city council and the city administrator's office.
Great. So if there aren't further objections to this wording, I'd like to call for a roll call vote.
Do we have a second?
We haven't had a second yet.
Yeah, I can second.
Okay. Roll call vote, please, to send this resolution to Ashley, who will take it to the city council and to the city administrator.
Thank you. Chair James Marston,
Yes.
Vice Chair Robert Burnham,
Aye.
Committee Member Nick Coontz,
Aye.
Committee Member Karen Luckett,
Aye.
Committee Member Suzanne Tejada,
Yes.
You forgot one member.
Yes.
Was
COVID.
Committee Member Skylar Cobley.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the
I'm
good
glad that
work.
we have unanimous consensus on this.
Good job.
I'm wondering if a scheduled presentation of some of the Access Advisory's needs in addition to this would be in order if we could get at some point agendize and do a PowerPoint presentation to the city council per se.
I would be supportive of anyone's effort to do so. Personally, I have gone to great effort to alert council to these problems that they created before they created them, and it fell on deaf ears. So I'm hesitant to get involved in that myself.
I kind of feel the same way Nick does. We've been to city council. There's all sorts of media outlets. There's television and radio and interviews. All this stuff is falling on deaf ears. It almost seems like it's just going to happen again, but I would appreciate if someone would want to go.
Well, would you be okay with maybe Ashley and I doing the presentation and all the members being at the meeting?
I would be fully supportive.
Yeah, it would be
great. But, you know, Nick, Bob, and I have written to all sorts of people, and So, yeah, that would be great to have someone else there. Maybe they'll listen to you guys.
To be fair, we have a new mayor since the last time we appeared on
Right,
this subject, so.
And he did say he'd like to meet with people on this, so, yeah, let's work on that. Why
I
don't
read
you,
that quote as well.
Chair Marston, if I may interject, we do have upcoming, we're tentatively scheduled for September for our annual access advisory update
okay,
at council, which if I'm still in this interim role at that time, I will be presenting at council. And there is an ad hoc committee meeting or an ad hoc committee
okay,
for that, developing that presentation. So
Right.
we can talk about that.
that would be a
little
good
bit
time to
further
do it, yeah,
on, under the subcommittee reports.
okay. Maybe that subcommittee can work. Are you on that one, Karen? The
I am.
report? Okay. All right, well, the first subcommittee report is the sidewalk ad hoc, which I know Nick has a lot of stuff there. Do you want to just take the rest of the time to do those?
Well, let's see, we can bring up the slide that I provided now. Let's see if I can find my notes on this. So just as a little background for our newer members, Jim Dewey, the Streets Operations and Infrastructure Manager, who's also now a CASP, I'm happy to report, asked the AAC for help in prioritizing projects related to accessibility in the public right of way. And so this sidewalk ad hoc committee was formed. And there's a little overlap between this sidewalk ad hoc and the blue curve ad hoc. Because much of what I'm about to present from the sidewalk ad hoc report came as a result of the blue curve ad hoc's previous work in an investigation. So a little more history, that the blue curve ad hoc was formed because of concerns about diminishing inventory of on-street blue curve parking. And we were hearing from the public about this concern, and I was, and I know other board members expressed in open meeting that they had the same concern. So we had Downtown Parking come in and give a presentation, and they said, "Oh, no, we're adding blue curbs all the time. They're not going away." And so we got some global information system data from them, and I audited this data. And I found it grossly inaccurate. The concerns of the disabled public. I don't remember the exact details, but it was shared that sorry, yeah, it was not the city engineer, the park traffic engineer, correct. He was of the opinion that disabled was the vast majority of the work that I'm going to show you here falls into that kind of category. Here's one where the sign is in the parkway. There's a little bit of a landing pad for you to open a door, side ramp would work here, a rear ramp, or someone who stores their accessibility, mobility equipment in the trunk would probably struggle here. If you go to the next slide, we'll see the current state of it improved.
There's a couple street signs.
There's a utility pole. Has apparently met its accessibility requirements. That's not an alteration to catch up. So here we're seeing an after. We didn't see the after of the previous one. Oh, actually this after, this formatting is all messed up. All right, this blue curve that we're seeing now is the alteration that took place on the first before picture. It's at Quinto Street. They moved the the ADA sign to the front of the accessible parking zone and extended a little bit. If we scroll up a little, then this before is on Arriaga Street in front of the Unitarian Church. And we have an after, if you scroll down, keep going. There it is. They extended this by 20 feet. And originally it was blocked by both the ADA sign and the tree. And now we have plenty of room for a side loading ramp van. We can scroll down more. This is probably one of my favorite changes. This was the 2100 block of Santa Barbara Street. The blue zone is to the right in this picture, and it's got an ADA sign that's blocking the parkway, and the parkway is grass, and that would be difficult for a wheelchair to navigate. If we scroll down, keep going, it's all out of order. Here we are. This is the alteration in the center here. They moved the APZ to the left of that ramp. The ramp is painted red here. So this orients a ramp to the rear of a vehicle and has a nice concrete parkway infill for a side loading ramp van. This is probably one of the most accessible parking spaces within the city of Santa Barbara. Although there's not a lot of guidance on the ADA about compliance, but the best we have is the PROAG guidelines, and this, as good as it is, falls short of the PROAG guidelines, just for perspective. If we go up, there's one more here. This blue curve is on Noble Street near Santa Barbara High School, and I saw this and saw the potential for a high school student struggling with a manual wheelchair in the mud, and talked to Mr. Dewey about it, and he did a flexi pave. He had the city prioritize a flexi pave infill, and if we scroll down, we can see what that looks like. Keep going, there it is. So this is, a permeable surface that's been used in tree wells around town. So this is also now a pretty accessible parking space with a ramp behind it and a clear landing through the parkway in another pretty key location at Santa Barbara High School. I can go into more, but I realize we're past the hard stop and we have somebody with a public comment that I'd like to entertain if we can.
Public comment from Elizabeth Swordman. Elizabeth, I'm going to allow you to talk. If you'd like to unmute, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say thank you to the board for your work and the fact that you volunteer your time and just really advocate for those individuals that need the services that you're discussing. And I just wanted to make a comment. I think I had sent an email earlier, and I know staff it's short staff, so I get it. Just trying to get clarification on what guidelines the city uses in the public right of way. So perhaps you can bring that up at the next meeting. I know there's not enough time here, but we are interested in to see what is the city applying. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You're talking about the what the CBC applies in the public right of way for if the city's doing that. Is that your question?
Well, I'm wanting to see, I mean, as a CASPN that was with the city for 17 years, there are different layers of requirements. ProWAG hasn't been adopted. I don't know if the city of Santa Barbara has adopted that through their adopting ordinance, but we have ADA and we have the CBC that apply to different elements that are in the public right of way. So I just think I want the board to understand and the city to make statements as to what is applicable. What standards is the city using when they apply for work that's being done in the public right of way?
Can you answer that now, Ashley, or whether they're using CBC in the public right of way?
Chair Marston, I will do my best to answer, and then we accessibility guidelines have not been adopted officially, but they are our guiding document. For example, the parklets on State Street, where you essentially have building elements that are within the public right of way. The CBC does apply in those instances. We also, the city has adopted, we have city adopted standard details for construction within the city right of way. So that includes things like access ramps, sidewalks, a long list of items beyond that. But we have essentially voluntarily decided to follow the CBC for access ramps and the requirement for truncated domes. So the city standard is federal yellow truncated domes with a 3-foot width. And that is following CBC because it is more restrictive than the ProWAG. So in that instance, we have adopted the CBC for truncated domes in the public right of way.
But you are saying that structures now on State Street, the parklets are under CBC?
That's correct.
Okay, so there should have been a permitting. Well, let's forget that. Now, your hard stop at 12, was that because someone's taking the room or you have to go or?
We have another appointment.
Okay.
Scheduled.
I won't push you then. We have other subcommittee reports to do and also the suggestions on new agenda items. And I would suggest that maybe those be sent to you.
Yes,
Some
Chair Marcy,
people-
that's exactly what I was going to suggest.
Okay.
If each of the committee members could send an email to myself and Sarita King with
Okay.
your suggestions for future agenda items. And then Chair Marston and Vice Chair Burnham and I will get together to discuss. And we had talked about starting a new prioritization
Okay.
Right.
list of those suggested items.
Sounds good. And that could be written just to ADA@SB Gov, right? That would get to
Yes.
you and to Sunita.
Yes, that's perfect.
And also to Brian too, right?
I believe Brian is
He's
still
still
on
on
that
there.
email box.
Okay.
yes.
Well, we have a
One
few
more
ad hoc.
question regarding that. Chairman Ashton, could you please, send us an email regarding the CBC and all the regulations that address the handicap parking? I know there's the CBC is 22507.8, which addresses stopping, standing and parking, but it doesn't address the actual access way to the sidewalk. So if we could just look at that for our own reference, please.
I will take a look. I may direct you to the ProAg, which is more applicable to the accessible on-street parking. I'm admittedly not a CBC expert, because it does largely, largely applies outside of the public right of way. But I can send out, a link to the ProAg, and, if there's follow-up questions regarding the CBC, I can consult with the appropriate
you.
experts.
And Ms. Duckett, I think I sent you the whole CBC website, right? It's very large, but you got that email from you, right, a month or so ago?
I got the handout. I'm not sure. I'll have to look at it.
Okay.
CBC 11B covers accessibility.
Right, that's all you have to look is 11B. And of course,
Yeah.
Suzanne knows all about that one. She might be the expert here
Okay.
on 11B. Well, thank you all for coming. Will, Nick, I want to thank you for the nice resolution. I think it's good work there.
Yes.
And you're gonna get that to the council.
Our next meeting is August 26th.
Vote to adjourn.
I don't think, I think we just call it to adjourn.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Actually,
so
I'll
everyone, I
be
was-
in touch with you